So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to move on to the next session. So, kindly be seated. Thank you very much for your cooperation. So, as the judges are reviewing the pitches, let's move on to the panel discussion 8. Creating values together, collaboration with the Japanese companies. This session is moderated by Ms. Aki Jan, the principal of the World Innovation Lab. And our panelists are Mr. Nikki Pratama Agahari, the founder and CEO, Australian Scientific Pty Limited, and Dr. William Chernikov, the Senior Manager, Global Research and Innovation, Toyota Mobility Foundation. So, Ms. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our last but not least session, Creating Value Together, Collaboration with Japanese Companies. I know it's happy hour, so thank you for being here and spending time with us instead of grabbing beer somewhere. My name is Aki Jan. I work for a global venture capital firm called Will. We manage roughly $2.5 billion, and we're backed by Japanese corporations and government entities in Japan. We invest in startups based in US, Europe, and Japan. Today, we're going to explore how collaborations between Japanese companies and startups can drive innovations and what it really takes to make these partnerships happen. And I'd love to introduce our amazing speakers today. So I'll start with Mr. Nikki Agahari. Nikki is the founder and CEO of Australia's Scientific, a health tech startup spun out of Harvard Medical School. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science and MBA, and completed a Health Innovation Fellow at Harvard. With experience spanning R&D, sales, and corporate strategy, Nikki has led innovation efforts across Asia Pacific, North America, and beyond. And next is Dr. William Chernikov. William is the Senior Manager for Global Research and Innovation at the Toyota Mobility Foundation. He holds a PhD in System Engineering from George Washington University, Executive MBA from University of Maryland, and engineering degrees from MIT and Boston University. William brings deep expertise in technology strategy and cross-sector collaboration. And I'm gonna throw a fun fact here. So I spotted William in the gym at 4:30 a.m. this morning. And he was doing an intense weight training. And after that, I actually saw Nikki working really hard to prepare for his important meeting by 6 a.m. in the lobby. So either we're all early birds or terribly jet lagged.
Terribly jet lagged.
Before diving in, I would love each of you to introduce yourself and your work. Let's start with Nikki.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you all. My name is Nick Agahari. I was a health tech fellow at Harvard Medical School, and that's where my company spun out of. My background previous to this has always been in big med tech, Boston Scientific, Medtronic. I've had the opportunity to commercialize technologies all around the world, working in Greater China, North America, Central America as well. And today I'm here because I've had the opportunity to work with a few amazing Japanese companies. In fact, our lead investor is a Japanese company called Roto Pharmaceuticals, and they continue to support the efforts that we're doing to create a smart patch technology to treat patients with urinary incontinence, with Japan having the fastest aging society in the world and incontinence being quite prevalent in the Japanese society. Will?
Thank you. Privileged to be here. As I was preparing for this panel, I was reflecting and realized that I've pretty much spent my entire career, say call it 25 years or so, either working with or working for Japanese companies. So I'm privileged and excited to kind of share those insights and perhaps some hard lessons learned in what it means to engage in that collaborative experience. My background has historically actually been in sustainable transportation and mobility, really doing a lot of that problem solving. And then over the last several years, taking a lot of that fundamental knowledge and experience in collaboration, asking the right questions, engaging and bringing new technologies forward, and bringing it over into this health tech, med tech, age tech related space. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you both. It's clear that both of them bring unique perspective. Nikki coming from the founder side and William from the corporate side, when especially comes to working across borders. To kick things off, we want to talk about collaboration today, but I think it's good to start with specific examples. So my first question is, can you share a successful example of collaboration between startups and Japanese corporations that you've been involved or observed? And what was the outcome? Why was it successful?
I can start us off. I'm very fortunate to have a lead investor that's a Japanese company. In order to get to that point, it was quite a long journey. It was a journey of almost 18 months. And it was a journey of building relationship and trust. And it was almost as if we started off trying to build a relationship first before asking for an investment. And that's what's really clear and differentiating about working with Japanese corporations. The champion that I had within the organization, I was actually her lecturer at MIT for an entrepreneurship boot camp. And from that relationship, as a lecturer to student, it evolved into a friendship. And from there, it looked into, hey, can we align strategically and help each other's career? And that blossomed into an investment. So it wasn't a traditional pathway where you're pitching for investment through a VC when you're working with a Japanese strategic. You're really looking to find a champion that shares the same values as you, and you're looking to go in the same direction because it's not a investment per se that you're building. It's a relationship for the long term.
That's a really good example. As a venture capitalist at a firm backed by Japanese corporate LPs, a big part of my job is to connect our portfolio companies with our corporate LPs. And these connections sometimes leads to meaningful partnership and close deals, but sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. And from my observation, I think the major difference comes from the relationship with champions, just you talked about. And I think there are two things that I want to highlight here. But one thing is sharing a goal, like same goals with champions. It's critical to understand who the champion is, what's their role within the organization, what are they trying to achieve, and even like how do they get promoted? So what's their next milestone? And if you can frame the partnership as something that help the individual succeed in the organization, I think the things tend to move faster. And then the second thing is lowering the hurdle, because these champions, they have millions of other things to do, and building this partnership is just one of their jobs. So it's really important to help them navigate conversations within the organization, maybe like create presentation that can convince their team or smoothen the process. So I agree that is a really good example.
Yeah, I want to build on a couple things that Aki and Nick have said, and I think you're going to hear this throughout the conversation. I'll give a specific example, but inherently, once you've engaged in that collaboration, you've already, it might take a long time to get there. It almost certainly will. But once you've entered that engagement, in my experience, right, you've already kind of crossed these major hurdles that are inherently probably likely going to lead you to a successful outcome, right? But getting there isn't always so easy. And one of the critical factors, we've heard trust, and it's not just about alignment of the goal. It's can you work together? Do you understand how to engage over the length of that process? Are you aligned culturally enough that you can have that successful trust-based collaborative engagement? That is really, really fundamental. There's often a misperception that we're trying to achieve the same goal, but if you don't go about it in the same way, you're going to have a lot of stumbling blocks, and you're not going to be able to get to that point of that foundational, successful engagement. I think for me, one of the things that I've observed and seen is I'll point to this ecosystem that we've helped create in Toronto with an organization called Mars Discovery District, and it really highlights the value of bringing the strengths of the Japanese company, collaborating with the local know-how and culture of a very well-respected organization to where the synergy and sorry, I used that word. But the strength of the operation is really greater than the sum of the individual parts, where we're each adding something into the equation that the other doesn't have. But before we got there, it took a long time of making sure that we understood that we could work well together.
A follow-up question on that is, how do you typically set the goal? Like, how do you measure the outcome from like corporate's perspective?
That's a really good question, and it's a challenging one because I think the answer to that may vary based on your cultural orientation, right? A goal, at least from the way I perceive it, is it's this qualitative outcome. Like, what is this big transformational thing we are trying to achieve? And then below that, we'll try to set some objectives. They're a little bit more quantifiable. They're a little bit more specific. And here's where it gets tricky and where understanding how to work with Japanese companies becomes very important. Is under that, we're looking at what we call the KPIs, right? The key performance indicators. And those can be challenging because these are really this view of how things are moving towards the achievement of those objectives and goals over time. Very different than what I see a lot of Japanese companies look for, which is, how can I check the box against very quantitative metrics and measurements, which are not the same thing as KPIs. And so this is where it becomes important to work with that champion to act as that intermediary to be able to build that communication and that trust to translate between these things that the Japanese company may traditionally, historically look at and are very important, to be able to then translate into these more diffuse, not necessarily diffuse, but have this qualitative, quantitative combination of understanding of how do we outline and allow them to measure and prove that they're achieving success while still having the flexibility that is necessary to kind of progress along these growth curves.
That's a very insightful perspective. And you two shared a great examples, but to step back, what will be the general opportunities in collaboration between startups and corporations?
Sure. I think there's a fundamentally different outlook that Japanese corporates have when they're making investments. They have a much more longer strategic outlook than a fund life cycle, where it's a typically 10-year. They're looking for an exit within that 10 years. But for the large strategics in Japan, they're looking at long-term objectives. They know there's this cliff that everyone's going to face in Japan in 2050, where the majority of the populations will be aging and the customer base will start to dwindle in their ability to spend money. So they're looking at opportunities on how their customers are aging and aligning your values with the values of their customers. So it's a very different outlook. If you're looking for someone that's just looking to give you capital and for you to grow that capital and make a return, a Japanese company may not be looking at it in that way. They're more looking at it, how can we align with your strategy? Are we going in the same direction? Is return on investment essential? Yes, it is. Definitely it's essential, but is it the only thing? No, it's not.
It's how does it fit within that corporate value? How does it fit within this longer strategic objective that we, as the company or organization, might be trying to achieve, right? Because we talked about trust, but it's also, you are now becoming essentially an extension of this Japanese company, right? And so there's reputation, there's brand affiliation that becomes really, really important to understand how you're integrating in with that long-term journey and how does it fit into that evolution.
Got it. And how about from the corporate's perspective, what do they get out from the partnership with startups? What do they expect from the projects with startups?
I mean, it may vary depending on the company or the entity, but there's usually some problem or some, we talked about the goal. What are we trying to achieve that we may not have the resources internally, or not we, they may not have the resources internally to solve, right? And it could be because of there's you need a different vision, or you're trying to stretch beyond kind of the normal work that is happening.
That makes sense. Would you like to add on that?
Sure. I think I've had a few experiences now where I've been invited to collaborate with the internal teams. And what a lot of the internal teams is just looking for is a different way of doing things. A little bit of risk taking, per se, where there's someone external that can take that risk capital and be treated as, hey, he's an external person. It's okay to share what our problems are because we've made an investment in him. He's part of the team, but he's not really in the team. So it's an odd dynamic. But what I think a lot of the corporations are looking to have is new thinking and new blood within that ecosystem that's not commonly accessible within the Japanese ecosystem.
Right. And I assume some of the audience here are from Japanese corporations and exploring opportunities with startups. And I guess I can throw a bit of like macro perspective here, but as some of you know that Japanese corporations across industries have $4 trillion in surplus capital, which is almost as big as Japan's nominal GDP, which is surprising. So this is a massive amount of money just sitting there. It's not invested, it's not utilized. So I guess what I was thinking is if you can channel some of this capital to startups, that could be a smart way of improving return on capital, return on equity. Yeah. So now we talked about opportunities here, and let's shift to the challenges, the common pitfall. We can start with examples again. If any of you has an example that you can share, you don't have to share the specific organization name, but any failure or unsuccessful case that you could share and why was it not successful?
I can kick us off. So I live in the Boston ecosystem in Cambridge, where we have a lot of Japanese corporations and a lot of their employees, and they usually come in cycles of 3 to 4 years. And that continuous cycle of rotation is quite nice. We get to meet a lot of different employees. We get to understand what they're here to do in the US. And a lot of them are there to scout for technology. They're there to make investments. But having that 3-year life cycle as well is sometimes detrimental, because in the first, second year, they're starting to integrate with the ecosystem. By the 3rd year, when they're looking to send reports to make investments, that decision-making back in central headquarters does take a long time. And startups need to be patient when trying to get an investment. It's not uncommon to hear back 6 to 9 months later. But a lot of the times those ventures have already closed their round and the opportunity's been missed.
You might have to start over again.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the example Nikki just gave is I don't know if I have a better one, right? I mean, this is an important aspect that if you're not part of the Japanese culture, that you need to understand on how you work with these counterparts. And these rotations are not uncommon in a lot of companies. And so how do you manage sustaining that relationship where you reach a point you think you're somewhere, now you have to build that relationship over again. But it's all part of this process, and it's just different than what you might experience in a lot of other countries. The other potential insight that I can share here is kind of the orientation around how do you I've already mentioned trust, but how do you maintain it, or how do you risk losing it? And it's where I've seen things not go well is when that trust is broken, and it's not broken because of ill intention. It's broken because of potentially different cultural norms around how you deal with challenges that come up, right? It's very important when you're working with the Japanese organizations. If something's not right, you gotta, making the mistake is not the problem. Not owning it and addressing it right away is. Not taking it back, let me fix it, let me come back a few months later, everything will be okay. That doesn't necessarily work. And once you break that trust, it's over. It's going to be almost impossible to recover and restore the relationship. It's where the cultural breakdown has led to a loss of trust because of the way challenges were addressed.
Additionally, I think founders need to be very patient. There are tasks that sometimes may seem repetitive, but that's because they're for different departments, different individuals. It's not uncommon to be asked to submit a financial statement specifically for the marketing department that may need to look different but tell the same story for the accounts department. That repetition is sometimes necessary just to get things done. And it's not a way of making life difficult for you. It's just a necessary part of business.
So we have to address these cultural differences. The way of communication is very different. And then again, the rotation system is a pain. Any other challenges that you could think of, or anything that we should address here, and then you can give advice to startups here who are looking to work with Japanese companies?
I think we've covered a lot of the key ones, and by no means are these challenges deal breakers, right? Because again, when you handle them right, you get an incredible, the opportunity that is unlocked is really, really incredible. It's about understanding how to maintain and engage in that successful relationship, and it comes down to, a lot of it comes down to just culture and understanding the operational norms so that you can leverage and access to the best way possible the strength that the Japanese company brings to the equation, brings to that collaboration. And once you've gotten there, it's when you're on the inside, the things that can happen to help transform and accelerate the business are going to be potentially fundamentally very different in a positive way versus other opportunities.
We talked about opportunities and challenges, but do you have any healthcare specific opportunities or challenges that you would like to share with the audience?
Sure. I think having a large corporation, when it comes to things like submitting your PMDA or negotiating with the Ministry of Health and Welfare for reimbursement, really allows you to have that extra brand affiliation. It certainly will allow you to get in front of the right decision makers much more faster than if you were to be doing it alone, or if you were to be engaging with a local consultant. Just having that brand affiliation, especially if they're a Nikkei listed company, if they're well known, if they have a history in Japan, it does put you on a different path than a startup.
And I assume some of the startups here are already working with Japanese companies or looking for opportunities to work with these corporates. What would be your advice on how to take the first step? How do you identify the potential customer, and how do you find the right champion within the organization?
I would say this is more of an art than a science, unfortunately. Finding the right champion that is able to influence the right decision makers. And it is quite a hierarchical society. So understanding who the key decision makers are really, really important. And having multiple champions within the organization is critical. For example, before a board meeting, it's not uncommon to have multiple pre-meetings to get alignment, to ensure that everyone is honored, everyone is on the same page, and no one is looked over. And once everyone's on the same page, then we can have that board meeting.
I will ask the same question from corporate's perspective in a slight different way, because I guess there are some Japanese companies who are interested in working with startups, but they don't know how to start with. And there are many, many startups in the same industry. And I guess this question is for you, but how would you evaluate these startups and how would you pick the right one? What makes you want to have a conversation with a startup?
Very important question. And I think there's some things that are common regardless of whether it's a Japanese company or not, right? I mean, you're evaluating, is this a startup that has promise? Are they solving the right problem? Do they really understand a lot of the things that I think any VC in any company is going to look for? I think in my experience, one of the things I look for is we've used the term collaboration, and it's really, really important. I need to know, and I want to understand how I can help you or how the organization I'm working with can help you. What is that collaborative? What are we going to bring to the table? Why us, right? Is it because we have particular skills in really understanding how to do very, very effective supply chain and manufacturing if you're a hardware-based company? Is that something we can bring to the table? And so it's, what is it? You're entering this collaborative engagement. It's not just about getting the money. It's, can you work with us, right? Can we coach you? Can you engage? What are we going to get out of this, right? The IP, the tech, the new products, the problems that we might be solving, right? Achieving our mission. If it's a nonprofit or a foundation, maybe more of a delivering social good. But in order to do that, we want to understand what are you looking at from us beyond just funding.
That's a great perspective. I know we have 3 more minutes. So I would like to move on to the closing statement, but I just wanted to say, I just realized that this is one of the very few sessions where we didn't talk about AI at all. And this is actually intentional. I just thought that we all deserve at least 30 minutes without AI joining our conversation. But let's wrap up this conversation. I would like to have closing statement from each of you, any advice to both startups or Japanese corporations that are looking for potential partnership.
Sure. My advice is that truly understand the breadth of a Japanese company, especially if they're publicly listed. Read the annual report, and you'll soon realize they have departments that you never thought the company would have, and they have capabilities that you never thought you could utilize and leverage. A lot of the Japanese companies that I've worked with behave almost like a trading company. They do have significant distribution, especially in areas of the world that a normal US strategic doesn't have. They have strategic strength in Asia Pacific, in Greater China market, in Southeast Asia, and they have very capable staff in those markets that you could leverage to gain access to those markets. So Japan is a very big healthcare market, and the Japanese have very strong presence in Greater China, in Southeast Asia. So when you're looking at the greater APAC market, look at Japan first.
I think if I had one piece of advice is make it easy for your champion. Make it easy for your champion. Now, what does that mean, right? In my experience, in my observation, right, you're rewarded, and it's very important to do what you said you're going to do, when you said you're going to do it, right, and make it very, very clear. It's not about being the rock star. It's not about exceeding expectations in some places and falling short in others. It's really, really critical that you meet your goals, your expectations, and can articulate that clearly against what is expected and keep the process moving. Because the people on the back end, right, need to be able to see that translation of, is the investment achieving what was required? Can I audit against it and see that progress against what was expected? That is the most important thing. And being able to articulate that clearly and maintain that trust and make things easy for your champion is the best piece of advice I can give. Now, how you do that, there's some art, but hopefully we've given some insights over this conversation on how to do that.
Thank you for sharing insightful perspective. Please join me in thanking both of amazing speakers today.
Thank you very much to our panelists for engaging the discussion. Thank you so much.